that will be in place. And again, I'm Daryl Braithwaite. I'm the Public Works Director for the city. I'll take a minute just to streamline things, and I'm going to introduce our presenters as well as city staff. I'd also like to recognize the council members that are on the webinar. We've got Councilmember Kara Hanzak, Councilmember Cindy DeBala, and Councilmember Randy Gibson. Appreciate them joining this evening. With us from the Low Impact Development Center is David Miller and Neil Weinstein. David's going to be the main presenter this evening. On the city staff side, I'm joined by Carlos Arejeta, who's our construction manager, and Ian Chamberlain, the Deputy Public Works Director. As I mentioned, this video or this meeting will be videoed and the materials will post it to the website. The focus tonight is the LIDC's review or report out on the 20 flood-prone sites that they've visited and evaluated, and they'll provide their presentation. We're thinking that'll be about an hour 15 minutes. That'll be followed by questions. What we'd like everyone to do is post your questions to the chat, and then once the presentation is completed, we'll review all the questions in the chat and just go through one by one and get through as many of them as we can. If there's questions that we weren't able to get to in the process of the meeting, we'll answer them and provide the answers available on the city's website, the Stormwater Resiliency Study website. I think that's about it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, David.
All right, thank you so much, Daryl, and thank you, council members and residents of Takoma Park for having us. I'm going to share my screen, so give me just a moment. So again, I'm David Miller. I'm the Director of Engineering with the Low Impact Development Center, and with me is Neil Weinstein, our Executive Director. And we have been working on this Takoma Park Stormwater Resiliency Study for, I guess, about a year-ish now. Some of you may have seen me and some of our other staff on site when we were doing some tours and investigation of the different flood-prone areas. So hello again, if I saw you there. Our agenda for tonight is just a summary and focus areas of the study, a little bit of discussion of the study areas. We're not going to go into detail about all 20 areas, more explaining what we saw as more generally. A short discussion of our assistance for residents that we'll be providing, our swim modeling and approach, and then questions and answers at the end. If you have any questions while we're going, go ahead and throw that in the chat, and we'll answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. And I'll try to keep this less than an hour on the shorter side out of respect for everyone's time and to allow for some time for question and answer. Our study goals and focus, we were assessing the study areas compiled by the city. And as mentioned before, there were 20 of those. And those were created from the city staff and outreach areas. So known areas that public works staff were aware of that have some flooding concerns or nuisance flooding issues. And then also based on Takoma Park outreach efforts, and those were compiled and we worked, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Our goal is to provide recommendations and assistance to the city of how to deal with some of these flooding issues, some potential solutions or projects that could be used to address some of these flooding issues. And then we've also performed a detailed study of a smaller area, so kind of a sub area where we were able to go in and do some swim modeling and get a clearer view of what's going on there. So I know the map is a little bit small, but these were the 20 original study areas throughout the city. They're pretty well distributed. And then at the beginning of this process, we went through each area with city staff, and we actually adjusted these areas a little bit based on what projects the city had already done, emerging problems in different areas. And so these were the final 20. You can see they're a little bit smaller and a little bit more focused. So for each of these areas, we went out to the site, we did a field assessment, and we met with residents and council members of those areas got to hear some really great input from the residents who see these flooding and stormwater issues all the time. And then we also were able to collect some data and some information from the public works staff who's been, on the other side of things, helping deal with all of these issues. So as part of our report and as part of our investigation, this is just an example. This is study area 14, which is on Elm Avenue. We were able to go in, use GIS information, the most recent GIS information available from Montgomery County, as well as the GIS pipe network available from the city. The city's done a really great job of digitizing your stormwater network, and we're able to use that information. And we've kind of just created this map and a collection of information, whether it is from the GIS, other analysis tools, or from residents and people who have observed things, excuse me. With that, we provided a set of recommendations for each area. Some of these recommendations are more specific and some are a little bit less specific. Since the city is responsible primarily for the right-of-way, we tried to focus our recommendations that are more specific on actions that Public Works or the city may be able to take. So for example, it might be, there's a head wall in this area that looks like it could be damaged. Repairing it could help with the problem. An inlet that's too small, things of that nature. When it came to problems that were reported that were on private property, we're being a little bit more general, and we're also going to be, and I'll show a little bit of this later, providing a residence guidance document that can help homeowners who are dealing with some stormwater issues on their property take steps to mitigate those and improve drainage. So this is that residence assistance document. This is just a page from it. So there's a number of concerns we found on these properties that were relayed to us by residents and that we observed in the field. Having a wet yard is one. Stormwater during larger storms flowing deep through the property, groundwater intrusion into basements, things kind of that nature were the primary issues. There were other ones that had to do with the right-of-way, like areas where storm drains were maybe not adequate to handle a large storm flow, and so there's ponding in the road. That's more of a right-of-way city type of recommendation. But so for the residents, this document will go over some things like positive drainage, how to direct the path of flow. So you can see here, there's kind of an example of a rock swale. And some residents in the town have already, or in the city have already used things like this. You see some really great use of things like conservation landscaping as well. So we'd also always recommend, talking to your neighbors, because some of them have been really successful in mitigating some of the runoff issues. So this document will go through common issues we saw in the city of Takoma Park, and then different techniques that can be used to help mitigate those issues. So we hope that this can provide some assistance for residents who may not see, an immediate project in their area. So with that, I'll transition over a little bit to our swim model. I'm not going to get too much into the details, but I'll try to give a pretty broad explanation of what we're doing. So we had 20 areas, and originally the idea was we were going to take one or two of these 20 areas and do some swim modeling. When the areas were refined, we realized that there were about 5 that were in the same watershed, let's say, in the same kind of sewer shed. So we decided to combine those, and we modeled a section of the city. Here you can see an image. This is the GIS that's mostly from the city's system, and that's all the storm drain in the city. So once we found our area, and I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, hopefully you can. Our modeling is kind of in the lower area of the city here. We ran a few different types of storms and scenarios through the model. So the normal design storms for stormwater tend to be either the 2-year 24-hour storm, which is for inlets and things of that nature, in the 10-year 24-hour storm, which is generally how we're going to be sizing our pipe system. So since the 10-year is larger than the 2, generally people will focus on, hey, can our pipe system handle the 10-year storm? We ran the 10-year storm, and we also ran the 50-year storm. We ran the 50-year storm just because as you have these larger storm events, or if you want to see what happens in your system with a slightly larger event, the 50-year storm is a good way to go. Going all the way up to the 100, you tend to see just flooding everywhere because the system isn't designed for that. Along with these storms, we also modeled a few other ones. One is the 6-hour event, and that's more of what you would call a cloud burst event. So it's a little bit less rainfall, but it's falling in a much shorter period of time. And then we also modeled what we call the future event of all of these. So a future event, and there's a lot of different modeling and a lot of science around this right now. They're coming out with something called the A storm soon, and there's a lot of different models that look at this. But a very popular approach and an approach used by a lot of modelers is to use a 25% more intense storm to show what future storms could look like. So we also did a future 6-year 24-hour, or sorry, 10-year 6-hour and a future 10-year 24-hour to see where there could potentially be vulnerabilities in the system if storms get more intense as they seem to be. We also did a few scenarios with the storm events. So there are multiple parts of the system. You kind of have your upland areas. So that might be on your street, you're kind of higher in the watershed, you have your inlets and you have pipes. And then near the bottom where the system outflows into a river, you have these really large culverts that can be, 12 feet by 8 feet high. They're very large. Sometimes in the modeling, you want to see what would the impact be if I increase the size at the top, what happens on the bottom? So we ran a few scenarios where maybe the upstream pipes were enlarged to show, okay, let's say the city went and upgraded the entire storm drain system. What happens downstream? Are there any effects downstream that we need to look out for? So we ran a couple of scenarios showing the current system and an upgraded system and a few things like that. So, modeling is a great thing to do, and it really can help us look at where the nick points in the system are. So maybe it's, this area might be a little undersized or we have an issue here. It is a little bit limited, and the limitations are often on the scope and the quality of the data you have. So we are using a lot of LiDAR contours. So our topography is LiDAR. It's not as good as a field run survey. The city actually has really good GIS for a storm drain system from systems we've seen. However, like all things, it's data that's based on the last 100 years of projects and things like that. So there are pieces missing. You might have pipes that aren't exactly the right size, and we do try to look for that and fix it. And then there are some data gaps. And when we have data gaps, we fill it in with the best possible information and we make a few assumptions. But all that is to say, a model of this kind isn't really used for design. So I might be able to see, hey, it looks like this pipe in this area might be a little undersized, but I can't tell you it needs to be exactly 36 inches or exactly 48 inches. It's more, this is telling us we need to investigate this further and maybe do a project here. And in that project, you're going to be doing your detailed engineering calculations. Another limitation we had is there's water coming in from the District of Columbia along Eastern Avenue. The data and information available for those systems isn't great and isn't easy to get. So we have some of that data and we had to make some assumptions there. And this study is not focusing on that, it's focusing on the impacts within the city. So how are we using this model and what are our recommendations looking like? So we use this model to evaluate what areas in our study area may benefit from an infrastructure project or may benefit from some other type of further look. And then working very closely with the city, we have right now, and this might be subject to change, 10 projects that are recommended. And just to give you an example of what those might look like, one of the things that we noticed in the city was actually the 10-year, 24-hour storm capacity in the pipe system is pretty darn good. There weren't a ton of areas where we could say, oh yeah, this looks too small, or you have a capacity issue. So when we're out in the field and we hear, hey, there's localized flooding here, when it rains, water ponds in the street, and then our model's telling us, well, the pipes are adequately sized, we need to start looking at some other things. So one of our recommendations is an evaluation of and an enlargement of the storm drains that are on the surface, those curb inlets, because the pipe can be adequately sized, but if it's an older and smaller curb inlet, maybe the water just isn't able to get into the system. So that's an example of that's a kind of a smaller recommendation because those are easier projects. We have some larger ones, but that's an example of something we may have recommended. So here's, a view of the model study area. It is south of 195, which is Carroll Avenue, and it's bounded kind of on the south by Sligo Creek tributary, which is where it outfalls. And it includes some area here, as you can see on the left, of DC, because this water, we believe, is flowing into the Takoma Park system, which is a bit of a challenge for the city, but it's just kind of how the watershed works. So to show you a little bit about what the model shows us, I always find this kind of can help people. So we've built essentially this model, right, of all the storm drains in the city. So this brownish line is the ground, and then these are your little structures and inlets and all of your pipes. And so when we run the model, it runs it over a time period. And it will actually show us the pipes filling up with water and emptying of water. When you have an issue with capacity, and for, just by the way, this I think was the future 6-hour storm. So this is a storm that the system was not designed for, and that's why I picked it. So we can have an example showing a lot of capacity issues. You'll see the pipes filling up all the way, these structures filling up, and then we'll also have this thing called the hydraulic grade line coming out of the ground, and it'll show us this nice red dot saying, hey, we have a problem here, water can't get through, and that's what tells us to look a little bit closer. And then we'll also get this map view. So this is super helpful in showing, in this particular storm that we were looking at, this section looks great. Some of these sections look great, but hey, look, there's a whole bunch of problems here that we're having capacity issues, or maybe up here in this area, we're having capacity issues. So we're able to use that as a tool, and we can go in, we can say, okay, is there a data gap here? Is there a pipe that looks like it's the wrong size? We've been working with the city to identify some of those. Is there, a drainage area in this area that there's a lot of impervious area that could benefit from a best management practice like a fire retention or permeable pavement to slow that water down and reduce your peak flow? What's going on in these different areas? And that's how we developed our list of recommendations. So with that, I hope I kept it nice and brief for everybody, and I'd love to answer some questions. So Daryl, would you like me to just go through?
Yeah, if you want to start with rolling down the
Sure.
or we're happy to host it as well. I see the first question is the data sets that you're using to calculate the 2-year, 10-year, 50-year.
Yeah, so I
2014.
see one a little bit higher.
Will there be a written report? Sorry.
Yeah, will there be a written report? Yes, there will be a quite long written report. So Every single one of these 20 areas has 2 maps and 2 sheets of written information about them. And then we also have report explaining the methodology and all of the work that went into it, as well as the recommendations. So there will be a pretty lengthy report. We're working with the city on finalizing that report and the findings and the recommendations. And I think, Daryl, that will be public information. So.
Yeah, everything that from the study will be posted to the Stormwater Resiliency page on the city's website, just like everything we've done up to this point has been. So everything that'll be the place where all the data is available, all the reports, all the information.
Yeah.
All right, so before we launch into the next question, this is Ian, Deputy Director of Public Works. I do want to make a quick mention that if we have a particularly long or difficult question, we may ask for an email follow-up, and we're going to get back with a public response as well as response to that email. I'm going to go ahead. Scroll down here to the second question. It's a question about the data set used to calculate. Was it the 2-year, 10-year, 50-year, or Atlas 14 data set?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I'll answer this. This could be a very long answer, but I think I can give a kind of a concise one. So we actually took prior storm data and created a hydrograph for this area, and then used the 10-year 24-hour, the 10-year 6-hour, and then the 50-year 24-hour, the 50-year 6-hour, and then the future storm, so a 25% more intense storm. And then we ran it through that hydrograph based on historical data. And beyond that, I think that's a little bit long for this forum.
Okay, fantastic. The next one I've got here is a question about stormwater running into Sligo Creek, whether it's part of the study. And they're curious about the area near the old hospital specifically. So I don't believe that we did any creek study, but I'll actually let the experts speak to that.
Yeah, there's no, I would say broadly, some of this water would end up in Sligo Creek because we have a tributary to Sligo Creek. But I do not believe that that specific area was part of our swim model. Our swim model, and I'll just back up. I can show this a little better. You see the Sligo Creek tributary. It's south of Ray Road. It goes under New Hampshire Avenue. That was the receiving body of water for the area in the swim. The next question.
I've got you here.
Oh, thank you.
It's several questions kind of rolled together. Did you account for soil quality, impervious surfaces? And what is the future facing modeling based on estimated precipitation? So have you taken any assumptions for that future precipitation?
Yeah, and thanks. That's a really, really good question. So yes, there are these things called hydraulic soil groups. Soils are classified into A, B, C, and D soils. And we actually have, and this data originates with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, soil studies of the entire country. So we can take those, we put them into the model, and then we also have the impervious areas, basically your house, your driveway, the roads, and using those, we have something called a curve number. And that basically explains if an inch of water falls on this thing, how much of that gets absorbed into the ground and how much runs off. And so based on the soils and the cover, so not just impervious, is it, trees, is it a good condition lawn? There's all these other factors. And sometimes it's also by zoning, they'll do it. So a residential lot may be zoned at 35% impervious and they'll have a curve number. And so based on those curve numbers, that's how we figure out how much runoff is actually going to be going into your system. So great question. And then future facing modeling. Yes. So we take the storms that are quote unquote today's storms and we increase the intensity by 25%. That is a stand-in if there are people who are working on different types of modeling. A storm is coming out, which is a new storm that people are using, but it's a pretty well received and widely used metric to use 25% increased intensity. So we're showing more runoff and a higher peak flow looking at future storms.
And can I add something, David?
Please.
So yeah, on a storm, which should be actually out by the end of the year, what's going to happen is we're going to recommend that the numbers in that was 14, which is the precipitation depths, be increased. I think it's like at 13% or 14% right now. So it's going to be, if you're at 20 or 25%, you're accounting for some climate change to the, what is it, CG or whatever, the higher range that was done in the climate change study for the district a couple of years back.
All right, this is Ian again, and I'm going to launch straight into the next question. This has to do with storm drains versus sewer drains. And I can answer this one just from the public works perspective, but I would love to have the professionals chime in as well. All of our storm system drains to our major tributaries. So that's Brashears Run into Sligo Creek. Long Branch receives a fair volume of our runoff. And here on the image, you can see it's called Sligo Creek Tributary. And that's also called Takoma Branch. So all of our stormwater system does drain to existing daylighted creeks or waterways. We do have a couple offshoots that run across county lines or into, maybe not anything into the district, but I wouldn't be surprised if we had a single stormwater pipe that ran out of the city limits. But for the most part, all of our stormwater systems drain into those waterways. There is a little bit of issue that we've heard from WSSC where people's private stormwater drains tie into WSSC's sewer system. But for the most part, we do actually have a very well separated storm and sewer systems. So,
and I'd like to add to that, Ian, the sewer and the water are never supposed to mix. That's a combined sewer, which we're trying to get rid of in this region. So, but some people do make illicit connections. They tie their storm drains into a sewer line where they can, but they're not sewage water is never supposed to reach any of the streams.
And I would just add that historically, Takoma Park system, which was originated by WSSC, is separate. So we don't have any combined sewer and stormwater systems that exist within our stormwater system.
all right, this is Ian again. I'm going to launch into the next one. This is a couple, but they're all clustered and relevant. When will the study be made available? And how can residents work with the city on any potential recommendations?
I think I might throw that one to you, Daryl.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I don't know, David, when you think you'd have it available. Once we have a couple more deliverables in the LIDC's work, and so we'll continue at least one more community meeting to go through their report. As I mentioned, all that information is going to be on the website. I don't know, David, when you think this particular 2020 site report will be done, by the end of the month or before?
Yeah, so our study of the 20 sites is complete, and that has all been updated with Public Works comments. So if that's something you wanted to make available in the near future, that shouldn't be a problem, along with the residents guidance document. So all of that is essentially complete. I think we have one more QA/QC to do just to make sure. The final study with all of the recommendations, that's probably a little bit further away, and I think we have that additional public meeting before that will be released. But the study areas, that can be pretty soon.
So I guess that's a kind of a two-part answer. We'll have some of it available shortly, I would say within a week or two. And then after the next community meeting, we'll have the rest of the report published. And then I think at that point, city staff will be evaluating the recommendations. We have some projections in the upcoming budget. We do a 5-year CIP where we identify funding requests for the next 5 years. So we've got some specific projects identified already for next year. And then we'll be looking into future years. I imagine that the council, mayor and council will want to be participating on this as well. So we'll collaborate and decide what would be the best avenue to review the recommendations and the city staff's evaluation of those, and kind of putting them on a track for which ones we can do when, which ones need further study, and then some funding estimates based on the pace at which we'll be able to accomplish any of the recommendations. And the next question is, what's the SWMM model?
Yep. A swim model is essentially, I put it, it's I'm trying to explain it without using the word model. So basically you're taking all of the pipes and the inlets in the ground, and you are connecting them, and you're running a rainstorm across it. So it's almost like you're simulating what would happen on any given day if you had this particular rainstorm. So you know, essentially, normally when you would do a design like this, you would be doing computations for every single pipe along the whole thing. A swim model kind of allows you to put it all together and see it holistically. So we've built your storm drain system, and then we're running water through it to see what happens. And you know, this is SWIM. We use a program called PC SWIM. But there are also other types of models that people use for other things. SWIM was an appropriate model for this system.
And let me just add, so the main difference is most of the models that have traditionally been used up till like the past 20-25 years just calculated the surface runoff. So if you made a change from grass or meadow to parking lot, you could look at the difference and the amounts of runoff and the peak runoff rate, or how intensely runoff comes off the site. What these model lets you do is put in just about any kind of storm event, and it lets you model the pipes as well as the surface runoff. So it kind of saves you a step, and it lets you put real storm events in there. You can add them in, so you get a more realistic look at how the rainfall patterns develop.
All righty. The next question is are there specific recommendations about what upstream neighbors can do to protect those that are downstream from their discharge?
That's a great question, and it's something we see a lot when you have a hill and you have lots of neighbors and water flows down. The biggest thing that we can do is be conscious of where we're directing our runoff. You know, runoff can flow to the right of way is a good place for it to go, or to be captured by the storm drain system. But where our gutters are pointing, if we have any type of a swale on our property or a stone swale. So in that recommendation document, it does talk a little bit about be conscious of where you're directing your water, because if you're just throwing it down to the next person, you know, 5 properties down the hill, it turns into a lot of water. So strategies we can use, and again, that, you know, some of this does need to be coordinated with the city, sending water instead of to the side to the right of way. Sometimes, and Daryl or Ian can remind me, I think there are some situations where the city will allow connections to storm drains. One thing that we've talked about with the city is, let's say they're putting in a new inlet in your area, can they, you know, give the homeowner an opportunity to connect to the storm drain directly, things of that nature. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is just, you know, when you're at the bottom of the hill, things can be a little bit tricky because you have runoff coming from the whole hill above you. And the document does address that as well. Some ways that if you are in an area that has a lot of flow, maintaining positive drainage away from the house, things like that, that can help you as well.
All right. The next question here is kind of a large scale question. Will the report recommend land use, planning, and development considerations or strategies that can be considered for financing purposes? There's a good deal of funding available through EPA for management and low impact development solutions.
Yes. So we're not specifically recommending like zoning rules or something of that nature. But one of the ways that we get grant funding and can apply for some of this assistance is by having projects and showing the impacts of those projects. So one of the things that this study seeks to accomplish is giving the city some options of specific projects and locations, and then we can use that to go after money. So I can't speak to can it be implemented now, but I would imagine the city is going to be looking into funding opportunities for some of these projects.
Ready. The next one. Can we set up a meeting to hear and discuss recommendations for study area 14 near Forest Park? Can each study area be discussed with immediate neighbors in future meetings?
I don't know, Daryl, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, thanks. We hadn't planned on doing that. I think that that is a recommendation that we can consider. I think our goal right now is to get through the full report and all the deliverables from LIDC, and then we can take the next steps after that. I think for some of the study areas, there were some very direct recommendations that the city could take on, and those would probably be those that may be most fruitful for that. There are others where it was individual property owners' actions, and we could take a look at coordinating those meetings too. But I think that's a great recommendation. We did not have that planned, but it's something we can consider. And I think if there's as the report is completed and comes out, if there's community members that would like to coordinate a meeting to review the particular evaluation and recommendations from a collection of sites, we could then help coordinate that together.
That's great.
All right, next question here. The commenter is curious about your oh goodness, let me just start over. I'm curious about your comment that conservation landscaping helped some residents. How did you determine this?
It's a good question. So conservation landscaping, for those who might not be familiar, is planting an area with different types of native plants that are really good at uptaking water. So you have an area, let's say it's turf grass, and turf grass generally has roots that are very, very shallow and a pretty limited capacity to uptake water. If you can add in certain types of native plantings, those plantings have deeper roots that helps promote infiltration, and those roots help uptake some of the water. When we were walking around at these study areas, we got to talk to a lot of different residents, and you could see in similar areas, some residents on the same street, almost next door neighbors, had implemented conservation landscaping. They had worked with a landscape professional. Some of them had put in some type of under drain or French drain, and their yards were visibly drier and more usable. And we heard anecdotally from the residents that before I installed this conservation landscaping, I was having these problems, and since I installed it, they've been much better. That also lines up with some other things we've seen in the field, and it's a pretty well-known practice in the industry of conservation landscaping. I believe Montgomery County Rainscapes has conservation landscaping as a best management practice in their program. I know that's maybe not applicable in Takoma Park, but it's just an example of it being a well-known practice that can help with specifically with wet or saturated yards.
Hey, Ian, you had skipped a question before that one. What has the regional analysis been regarding how regional stormwater inflow impacts Takoma Park? I don't know, David, if you could speak to that. We haven't done a regional analysis.
Yeah, so we haven't done a regional analysis. We did look a little bit at the impact just of the area of the District of Columbia that flows in. And what I can say about that is it is a large amount of water. You know, the city does have to convey that water through its system. And it does present a challenge for public works, especially when dealing with large storms, but we did not do a broader regional analysis, just an analysis of this study area.
All right. I'm going to read most of this one. So, good to look at right-of-way opportunities, but residents would like to help understand. Goodness. It's good to look at right-of-way opportunities, but residents would like help understanding where and why water is a problem on their property. Resident-to-resident conversations would make the most sense, but wouldn't it help to have city-generated guidance? That is, how about taking the role of motivating city resident activity, since most of the ground where the water falls is owned either by residents or by businesses, or is it city-owned land? So for the most part, yes, we've got wonderfully well-engaged city council. So public policy, I think, can help guide some of that resident-to-resident conversation and interaction. But actually, I'm going to turn this back to
Yeah, there is a deliverable in the report, and I think David included a piece of that in the earlier slide presentation. There will be a resident guidance document that goes through all the various opportunities or techniques that residents could consider. So we'll have that available, and it'll be on the city's website. In addition, we haven't mentioned Rain Plan, but Rain Plan is an avenue that residents have available to them for a no-cost analysis of the stormwater on their property and a virtual meeting to talk through what the most advantageous options might be for their property. So we've made that available. Again, that's through the city's website, and together with this management technique document, that'll be our main go-tos for helping provide that information for residents to explain the options and direct them to some technical expertise.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that too, you know, I know it can be frustrating sometimes when you're having issues on your property. A study like this, it's very difficult to give direct advice to every property owner. And so what we're trying to do is bring the resources to the private property owners. And so to help everyone, you know, deal with these problems on a site-by-site basis. What we do hope is that some of these, you know, public projects that are near private residences can also help on the private residences. Because if you're improving the drainage in the right of way, it can improve the drainage in the privately owned area.
All right, a bit of a note, but we should comment on it. I would imagine this report also informs this year's budget and 5-year plan. So could we speak quickly to that?
Yeah, we have this year's budget has already been allocated with projects defined and identified and most underway. We've completed the first phase of the Takoma Branch stream restoration project, and we're about to do a outfall and stream restoration project at Brashears Run. So the projects and the programs get determined well in advance, as I mentioned, the 5-year CIP. But this report will identify projects that will be plugging into the future out-year CIP. We have a list of projects already in the queue for the next fiscal year, FY25, for our capital projects. Couple of them are included in LIDC's recommendations. We had identified them previously, and their report reinforced that. So we will be using the LIDC recommendations to populate our capital projects going forward.
All right. To what degree is private and public property integrated into the modeling?
So that's a good question. Basically, it's all included. So all of the land within the drainage area is given that curve number, which is based on the cover and on the soils, and the water runs off of that into the model. I would say the focus of the projects is on public property because that is what the city is able to, to affect essentially. So the model takes into account all of the property, and the recommendations for the city for those larger projects are focused on the city infrastructure.
The next question is just to flip to the slide with the 20 studied points again. Daryl, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think those 20 points are actually on our website right now.
Yeah, they are. You can look in more detail at the map on the city's website, the initial locations and general information.
The next question is, will the study be expanded into other parts of Takoma Park, like the hospital area and Ward 5 in general?
We did have a couple areas in Ward 5, one area in Ward 5, Kennebec, Erie, and Flower. As mentioned before, we identified historic flooding sites around the city as the basis for the 20 sites. We don't have historic flooding in the hospital area site. In general, there's been pipe failure and other issues that have taken place on that site. There's also very little in the way of stormwater infrastructure on the hospital site itself. None, pretty much. There's a couple, but not much. So that hasn't been identified as a flood-prone area.
All right, and this is going to round out the questions for the evening. Currently, Takoma Park isn't eligible for rainscapes. Would the city reconsider that practice as a part of the stormwater initiatives?
Yeah, that's a discussion that comes up with council probably almost annually. One of the challenges is in order to give a rebate type program or create a rebate type program, there would be a need for additional staffing for acceptance, review, and administering of that program. There would also be additional funding needed. So the current stormwater fee that residents pay based on the impervious surface on their property all goes to our stormwater programs and the capital projects and repairs that we do in the existing infrastructure and improvements. In order to create a rainscapes program, we'd have to identify a funding source, either increase our stormwater utility fee or identify another source of funding. There is also consideration taken to the equity impact of that in terms of how that might affect residents if the charge was allocated to all residents, but only those that were able to afford it were able to implement projects on their property. So currently, we haven't moved in that direction. That's a policy matter that the council will review and has considered in the past. And so, that will continue to be a consideration.
So that does conclude all the questions. Are there any closing remarks anyone would like to add?
I was just going to say a bit about for the next round. We don't have that scheduled yet, but we will have another community forum to round out the LIDC's report. I think among the deliverables that we may be expected to hear, one is a little more detailed analysis of that study area that they have evaluated in greater detail with the SWIM model. The other is any recommendations for either city or county code language or regulatory changes that they might recommend to help improve situations. If it's related to city code, we could then review implementation on the city level. If it's recommendations for changes to county code, it would then be the city advocating to the county or the state for changes. So those are, I think, the remaining deliverables in the contract. And so we'll have our final meeting to review those. I don't know if David or Neil, you have a sense of if it's a month from now or 6 weeks from now, or I think we're getting pretty close to wrapping up.
Yeah, we're quite close. I'd say about a month, probably early mid-April is probably a good time for that.
Yeah, we'll get back with you. Let's look at our schedule and, we want to make sure we get it to you in a timely manner.
Right. All right. Any last minute questions or anything anybody wanted to add or suggest? If so, if you think of something afterwards, feel free to reach out to me or Ian or Carlos or Ali. On the city staff side, you can send emails to Public Works at tacomaparkmd.gov or to us specifically. And certainly share information with the mayor and council. We're about to enter the budget season for next year. So this is no doubt a topic that the council has a lot of interest in, and we'll be working toward developing some very specific plans to take this from the report stage to the actual program implementation stage. So again, I want to thank David and Neil for your work and efforts, and thank you all for attending, and appreciate the time and the questions.
Thank you. Have a
Thanks
nice,
for having us.
a nice evening.
All right.
Hey,
I
You good
guess.
there?
What's that?
You good?
Let's go ahead. and
Yeah, I
start.
think I end it, and then I think this thing's going to go to the cloud, and we'll get it posted to the website.
There's that one part where someone said we did a good job. I'm looking for that. Okay.
Oh, I see some thank yous. Yes.
That's good. All right, have a nice evening. Thanks, David. You did a great job.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Take care, everybody. Have a good
Thank
night.
you, David. Good night, everyone.
Bye.